Hello, good afternoon. This is Homero Salinas at Lincoln University, and we are very pleased to present to you to Mr. Chris Boeckmann, who is superintendent at Lincoln University, and he will be talking about the organic production of small ruminant. So you have questions. Amy Bax will be getting those questions from the Facebook chat, and if you want to send. So we are going to ask now to Mr. Chris Boeckmann if he present by himself, and later on to start presenting his talk.
Hello. And welcome. So as Dr. Salinas mentioned, I am the superintendent of farms here at Lincoln University. I've been here about 10 years. First 9 years I worked as the farm manager of the Allen T. Busby Farm, which is our certified organic research farm. And I am now superintendent over all the research farms here at Lincoln University. So what we're going to talk about today is as Dr. Salinas said, the organic production of the small ruminants. I'm sorry, what I want to do is I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to utilize. So I'm going to try to pull that up and share my screen. Let me know if you can see that. All right. So, all right, Dr. Salinas, you all see my screen there? Is that coming through?
Yes, it's correct.
You're good.
Okay. So what I did here when I'm going to talk about the organic production of small ruminants, my talk or discussion is basically, I broke it down in two major parts. So first, talking about the actual organic certification process and what those requirements are. And then once we go through that, we'll switch over and talk about what are the management and production implications of starting to produce animals according to organic standards. And so we'll go through the first part. If at any point you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask as we go through it. With organic certification, the organic certification process is outlined by the National Organic Plan, or what we refer to as the NOP. The NOP is published and enforced by the U.S. Department of Agriculture under Part 205 of the Code of Federal Regulations. If you were to go to those regulations, basically what you would find is a listing of all the definitions related to the process and regulations of organic certification, a listing of what those requirements are in order to produce organically, who do they apply to or who they applicable to, if you were to intend to actually label organic products. So in this case, if you're not only raising organic animals, but you want to sell lamb products or meat, that it would outline exactly what the process is to get a label approved to allow you to do that. It would outline what the organic certification process is, how you comply with it, what are the reporting requirements, and then lastly, it goes into quite a bit of detail. If you as a producer have a concern or do not agree with something that a decision has been made by your certifier or an inspector, there is actually an appeal process that you can undertake and try to get that rectified if you feel that you do not agree with the decision. If you as an organic producer wish to or if you as a producer wish to look at organic production of small ruminants. I listed a couple of resources here. The first one is what we refer to as the Organic Materials Review Institute, most commonly just called OMRI. OMRI is basically the entity that is responsible for reviewing all substances or products and determining whether or not basically they're allowed for organic production. They will tell you if they are allowed or if they are prohibited. And this would include not only the actual production of the animals, but it will also as far as handling and processing of any other product you intend to label. So OMRI is that entity which makes those type of decisions. However, as I'll talk about a little bit later, you as an individual producer will be required to have a certifier. There is some leeway where different certifiers may still require more information on different products, even if they are OMRI approved. But at a bare minimum, if you want to utilize any inputs, we need to make sure that at least they are listed under OMRI. The other two sources that I've listed is the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, most commonly just referred to as MOSES, as well as ATRA. Those two are excellent resources for organic producers, but I would also say even if you are not certified organic, if you are producing conventional, or if you're just doing something where you're labeling your products as all natural, both MOSES and ATRA are excellent resources that you can utilize and get access through the internet. And I strongly suggest you take advantage of that because they have a tremendous wealth of resources there that you can review on a wide range of topics. If there's a question you have, I would venture to guess that you can get the information you need to answer that through one of those two resources. The next slide here basically gives you an idea. On the left-hand side, the blue booklet is the National Organic Standards. Basically, this is the NOP that I referred to earlier. And when this particular booklet, I use it all the time to go back and basically just if I need to do a little research on something or verify something, this is a publication that's readily available. The two books on the right side, again, are OMRI, and these booklets have a complete listing of all the materials in our products that are approved for organic production according to OMRI. Now you can tell the green booklet obviously is a little bit outdated, 2013, but that's the one that I keep here in my office. They typically update it on a regular basis. One entity that I failed to mention was the National Organic Standard Board, or the NOSB. The NOSB is a board of individuals that meets on a regular basis, also to review the organic standards within NOP to make sure that things are going as planned, but also if there are new products, if there are new processes and decisions to be made, and possibly adjust the NOP, change the regulations, update them, that is the responsibility of the NOSB. So, but these are, again, a couple of the resources you can use when looking at organic production. So, if you were to decide that you want to take a closer look at the production of organic production of small ruminants, there's basically the two first steps you would have to undertake is number one is you would have to go through the transition period. The transition process, by definition, is basically that 36-month period during which you will be required to follow all organic standards, management practices, and utilize only those inputs or processes that are allowed under the NOP. However, during that 36-month transition period, you will not be able to sell any of your products and label them as organic, because it is, just as it sounds, it's that transition period where you're moving from conventional production to organic. And so therefore, you have to follow all the regulations, but until you complete that transition period, you're not going to be able to sell organic products. One caveat with that is that if you have the ability to provide an affidavit that states exactly what your last input was, say you used fertilizer or you sprayed a field on May 26th of 2020, if you are willing to sign an affidavit or get an affidavit from the previous owner stating exactly what that treatment was and sign it, then you can submit to that to your certifier, and they have the ability to make a decision if they will allow or consider that year that has already lapsed in this example. Since your last use of a conventional product, then your transition period may be shortened. But I want to say that that's a process that you have to go through You have to be able to document it. You have to have a signed document, and then it's up to your certifier if in fact they are willing and able to shorten that transition period for you. But that is one thing to take a look at. The second step in moving toward organic production is going to be the selection of a certifier. A certifier is an outside entity, by definition, as I have here, which you will apply. You will actually apply to them. You will send their initial application, your annual renewals each year. They are the entity also that you will provide all your documentation to, and that certifier will be the entity that will be responsible for arranging your annual third-party inspection, an on-site inspection. There are a lot of certifiers out there that will go through the process with you. Here at the Allen T. Busby Farm, we use EcoCert, who is based in Indiana. However, I'm not at all endorsing them as being the certifier that you need to use. It's just one option. There are a lot of certifiers out there. You need to do a little research on them and find out which one you think fits best for you. But those are basically the two first steps you have to take if you want to move toward organic production. So I said the first step with your certifier is filling out the application. What does an application consist of? The first part of the application is very basic information as far as where's your location, how many acres do you intend to certify? So as an example, do you want to certify the entire farm versus maybe you have 5 acres that you want to commit to organic production? You have to basically outline that in the application, the legal description of the ground that you want to have certified, what crops you intend to grow, be it a crop, it could be some type of produce or livestock. And then they'll also request some information is, do you, as an example with livestock, do you intend to sell certified organic animals for breeding stock? Or are you going to sell lambs? Or are you going to take it a step further, process the lamb meat and sell it to an individual or some other outlet where you're actually selling the meat? So they're going to require or request that information, but fairly basic information, just looking at what are your intentions, where are you going to do it, and how you intend to do it. The second part, which is really the meat of the application and what will take the most time, is what we call the Organic Systems Plan, or the OSP. The OSP is typically going to be filed with your certifier. They like to see them come in January, February, or March. The reason for that is the OSP is basically the roadmap for everything you intend to do. But the big thing about the OSP is that it has to be approved by your certifier before you can actually start growing your crop. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. By definition, what I have here, the way I would describe the OSP is that it is a detailed plan that lists all the crops you intend to grow, be it livestock, produce, or actual row crops, what inputs you intend to use, what field activities are you going to undertake, where are those activities going to take place, and then, as I said, that will have to be approved by your certifier, and the key word there is, or words, prior to any of that being done. For the OSP, I'll break it down a little bit further. A farm map. The farm map will, at a bare minimum, need where the property lines are. As I mentioned earlier, they'll also want to know what the current uses of adjacent property to outside of your property lines are. And the reason for that is if there is a conventional producer next to you that grows crops, is there a concern about drift over in your product or onto your property, which may affect your ability to remain organically certified. And then also, in addition to the outside boundaries, they're going to want each of your fields to be have some kind of numbering system placed on those. So as an example, this is the actual farm map that we submit to our certifier each year for the Busby Farm. And first of all, I want to mention that the Busby Farm is 285 acres and the entire farm is certified as organic. In the case of this map, The green lines outline the property lines for the Busby farm. You can kind of ignore the blue lines. That's basically for my own use. It just outlines where the water lines are for our livestock watering system. That would not be something that would be required typically by your certifier. We do have it on ours. But more importantly, you can see that each one of our fields has a plot number. And I apologize that those numbers and words are a little bit hard to read. But the white captions basically are the field number, as well as the number of acres per field or per plot. There's a wide range of ways to approach this, and it's something that you'll work with your certifier through. What we did was, we're a very diverse research farm. Not only do we have livestock, but we also have other crops that we grow. So as an example, in the upper part of the picture there, kind of in the center, you see a lighter green shaded area. That is separated out as its own plot number because that is where there were blueberries being grown, organic blueberries, as opposed to some of the other pastures or paddocks which are used for grazing purposes. But we can also break it down further if you go just up above that green shaded area. If you can see my pointer, the green shaded area is where we had the blueberries. Up in this upper right-hand corner, we had smaller plots where we were doing actual research. That plot number up there is plot number 12. If I have a researcher come to me and say, hey, I need to use 1 acre to do research on cover crops, I can label that as plot 12A and still remain within the numbering system that I've placed on my farm. The key requirement here, and the thing that your certifier is going to request, is that you're consistent from year to year. They don't want you to change your numbering system each year because they need to be able to go back for many years and follow what has been done, what inputs have been used. So it's important to give a lot of thought to how you want to number it up front so that you don't have to change it, and try to avoid changing the system as you move from year to year. Again, back on the OSP, in addition to your farm map, here are some other questions and information that they will require. Number 1 is field history. So on our farm map, we have pastures that are numbered anywhere from 1 to 35. And for each one of those, every year when I request my renewal, I have to go through for field 1 and say what crops will be grown there, if I'm going to plant any seeds. And the reason I say if is because if you have it in permanent pasture, we're fescue based, we have a lot of fields that we don't plant any. However, we do some warm season grasses that I'll talk about, some annuals. And so if you do plant any seeds, if you have any inputs such as fertilizers or anything, they'll want to know exactly what seeds or inputs are going to be used on what field. And then for every field on the farm, they'll want to know what your yield data is from year to year. Same way with inputs. You know, I list fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and your first reaction might be, wait a minute, we're doing organic production, you're talking about herbicides and pesticides. Realize that there are different compounds as far as herbicides, pesticides, even fertilizers that are OMRI approved and can be approved by your certifier, but it's not a lot of the same chemicals that were used for conventional production. Once you identify what type of fertilizer, so if you want to use some type of fish emulsion that can be utilized for organic production, they'll want to know who the manufacturer is, and they'll ask the question specifically, is that product that you're wishing to use OMRI approved? As far as livestock, they'll want information listing what is the organic status of the breeding animals. And that's a key question, because realize that even if you have females that are not certified as organic, they can still be used in an organic system. And to explain that a little bit further, if I have, as an example here on Busby, we have about 120 ewes currently that stay here on the Busby farm. None of those mature ewes currently are certified as organic. However, according to the NOP, as long as those ewes are managed as organic and follow all the organic standards, during the last trimester of pregnancy, then the offspring are considered organic at birth, so long as those lambs or kids do not receive any treatments after they're born. So that's why they'll ask the question, because you may very well have a lot of your breeding stock that are not certified as organic, but there is a process within the NOP that you can still raise organic livestock using those uncertified breeding animals. One thing that they're really going to want to watch with the livestock is that every animal will have to have some form of individual ID. And the reason for that is, again, they'll look at your records, and if you have a sick animal, they'll want to know, what did you do with that animal? How was it treated, etc. They'll also want to know how you supplemented those animals. Again, any supplement, any feeds you use have to be organic products, OMRI approved. Probably the last big section on the OSP is your record management. Doesn't matter if you're talking about crops or livestock, they are going to ask that you have production records that they can review. The more detailed, the better, as well as grazing records. As I'll mention here a little bit, there are specific requirements about the necessity, or it's required that the livestock graze so many days out of the year on actual forages. And so that's why they're going to request those grazing records, so that you can document that you did in fact have them grazing forages. So basically they're going to want to know in the OSP, what records will you maintain, how will you maintain those, and for how long. A good record of, I guess rule of thumb is that you're going to have to plan to maintain those records for a minimum of probably 5 years and longer if possible. So as we go through this again, let's assume that you've filled out all the information. You've sent off your OSP to your certifier and it's got approved. What's next? Well, the big thing with organics production is that your documentation. You're going to have to and need to document basically everything you do. So everything from your seed or feed tags to your product labels. So as an example, if you go out and plant any kind of seeds, you need to make sure that you go out and get one of the labels, actual labels, off the bag of seed and put that in a binder and be able to present that to the inspector. Same thing with feed tags. If you feed or pre-feed the lambs, then you need to be able to take a feed tag off one of the bags of feed and present that to your inspector. With the fields, they'll also ask that you maintain what applications were made, be it some of those approved or OMRI approved herbicides, pesticides, or if you fertilize, say you apply animal manure to some of your pastures, they'll want to know which pastures it was applied to, what were the application rates, and then your yield data from each of those. If you in fact sold products, once you've gone through the transition period, you have your labels approved, you've sold some type of organic products, they'll want to know where they went to, were they sold, did you consume them on site for your family, or were they donated to some kind of group within the community, which is something that we do here at Lincoln University when we have, not so much with the animals, but if we have crops that are grown and used for research, a lot of times we'll donate those to the local food pantry or something like that. We still have to be able to, even though they were donated, we still have to document exactly where they went. And then, as I mentioned earlier, document your grazing records. So as an example, this is what we use for our grazing records. And I'll try to walk you through this. I know it's a really busy page or spreadsheet here, but if you look on the column all the way to the left, it says paddock number. That is, again, that corresponds with the map that I showed you earlier of the farm. So that is basically our field numbers ranging from 2 all the way up to 35. For each one of those paddocks, again, the number of acres, which again corresponds back to the map that we submitted. And then the numbers at the top, 1 through 31, are the days of the month. So for every month out of the year, what we do is, since on the Busby farm we have both cattle, we have rams, as well as we typically will have goats used here. For every day out of the month, we label the field that they're in. So you can see that on, assuming this is June 1st, that the rams were in paddock number 16. And I believe this was actually January when we were feeding hay, so that you can see that they stayed in that pasture for the entire month. However, if you go to June or July, where we're actually rotating on a daily basis, then we would be rotating them, and the record would reflect exactly what paddock they're in for how many days, number of animals, etc. So again, now we have our OSP approved. We've done everything we said we were going to do. We have the records to approve it. What's your reward? So now the last step of the process is your annual inspection. It will be an actual on-site inspection. It will be a third party, typically not employed by your certifier, but it will be someone that will be contracted by your certifier. And to break it down, there's three parts to the inspection. The first one is that they're going to want to see your OSP. They're going to go through your OSP in detail, exactly what you said you were going to do and where. They're going to want to see your documentation. What seeds did you plant? What were your inputs? What were your grazing records, etc. You have to have all that documentation available to them. And once they've gone through that with you page by page, then they're going to want to walk around the farm. If it's just a small parcel that you have certified as organic, they won't necessarily need to see your whole farm. But in this case, at Busby, where the entire farm is certified, then we take them through the whole farm. They'll ask questions and basically just make sure that there's something that doesn't look suspicious or maybe doesn't reflect what you have documented or suggested you've done. So that's pretty much the organic process. And as far as the actual process of getting certified, maintaining it, and what you need to do. Now you do have wonder, so I have my livestock. The small ruminants are certified. How do I make sure that I don't lose that certification? Well, there's some things, obviously, like we talked about before as an example. If you want them to be certified organic, you're not going to be able to use antibiotics. However, one thing to keep in mind, and this is really important, is that the NOP specifically states that if you have sick animals, you are expected to treat them. From their standpoint, the health and welfare of that animal is more important than you trying to maintain your organic certification for that one specific animal. So if you have sick animals, you need to treat them. Yes, you will lose your certification on that particular animal, but it is a requirement that those animals be treated. If you use any vaccines, any supplements, again, they need to be OMRI approved, and that needs to be accepted by your certifier before you give those to your livestock. And this is something I mentioned earlier as far as the grazing requirement for organic animals. Basically, if you have any animals that you intend to certify as organic, they are required to graze forages 30% of the time, or roughly 120 days per year. You also sometimes get the question, if I'm certified organic with my livestock, can I have them in the feedlot? The NOP specifically states, yes, they can be in a feedlot setting, so long as you're using organic feeds and supplements, but not for more than 120 days. And the other thing I'll point out is that if at any point in an animal's life, if they lose certification, if you use an input or they're treated with something that is not approved for OMRI, by OMRI or your certifier, then that animal will never be able to go back to being certified. So once they lose that certification on that individual animal, that's a permanent scenario. So that's what you have to be aware of. And again, make sure you follow your OSP. If you ever have any questions, you need to contact your certifier. There are opportunities throughout the year if a situation arises that you don't expect, which we know happens every day in production agriculture. You can contact your certifier and say, hey, I have a situation. This is what I would like to do. Will you approve it or not? And typically your certifier will work with you and get you an answer right away. Say yes or no, this is what you can or cannot do, and maintain your organic certification. But it is critical that you establish and maintain a good relationship with your certifying entity. So that basically concludes the first part of my presentation. Again, I know it's a little bit, there was a lot of information there. And I know that I didn't present everything, but I just kind of wanted to give you an overall view. If you're not familiar with the process of raising organic animals, some of the requirements and some of the steps within that process. And we'll definitely open it up to questions. And if you have any questions as we feel free to ask, and I'll do my best. I'm not going to guarantee I can answer all your questions, but I'll certainly try to answer what I can. The second part.
Before you move on, Chris, if I might interrupt you for just a second.
Sure,
Yeah, Linda Coffey, who is the livestock specialist for NCAT, she's through ATRA, has been following along. And she says that not only are there resources on ATRA, as you mentioned, they also have sample applications. So you can sort of get an idea of what information you need to collect and how to go about filling it out and what your research you need to do. So that might be worth checking out to pursue this.
All right. Yes, good input. Appreciate that. As I said, ATRA is a tremendous resource that I strongly suggest you use. Even if you don't certify your animals organic, anything related to livestock production or just ag production in general, ATRA is an outstanding resource that more producers need to use. Any other questions or comments that I might want to address at this point, Amy?
I don't have any other questions in the live chat. Anybody who's following along, if you have questions for Chris, go ahead and drop those in the chat. I am monitoring it and I will make sure that he has an opportunity to answer them. So go ahead and comment if you guys have suggestions or questions, and we'll get those things addressed. But I'd say you're good to move on, Chris, if you're comfortable.
Okay. And as I said, I know I covered a lot of information, went through it fairly quickly. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any. So the second part of my presentation was going to be the actual day-to-day management of small ruminants within an organic system. When I started here at the L&T Busby Farm in 2010, they were still practicing conventional production. And so when we moved over to getting the farm certified and starting the organic production of small ruminants, it was a process. Basically, I started in 2010. The farm was not fully certified until October of 2012. So we've been maintained our certification for since 2012, so coming up on 9 years now. But what we found really quickly, and we knew that going into it, is when you look at small ruminants, it doesn't matter if you're talking about conventional or organic production of the small ruminants, there are some challenges that you know you're going to have to work through. And one of the biggest ones, and one that takes up a lot of discussions and a lot of heartache for some of the small ruminant producers, are internal parasites. That's a big challenge. And when you think about, I know when I first started, we were thinking about looking at, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this as far as making sure we can do it organically and still get past the internal parasites. But beyond the internal parasites, it's just overall flock health in general. Because again, you're not going to be able to utilize some of the inputs as far as your dewormers, anthelmintics, as well as just antibiotics if you do encounter some kind of flock health issue, if you want to maintain your certification. So some of the strategies that we utilize here on the Busby farm was, number one, your forages. Here at the Busby farm, in this particular area, we are fescue based. We don't raise any crops. We're fescue based, but we also use a lot of legumes within our pastures. We actually every year go out and frost seed all of our pastures with red clover. Again, when you talk about fescue, obviously for those of you that have produced livestock in the past, and I don't mean just only small ruminants, but even cattle, there's no question that fescue is a very good forage for a lot of reasons, but fescue also definitely creates some challenges. And so one thing that we try to do with the fescue and the approach we've taken basically is, when it comes to fescue, it is a good forage, But for any of the challenges you have related to the summer slump, because it is a cool season grass, as well as anything related to the fescue fungus, I say that dilution is a solution. So the more diversity you have within your pastures, the more successful you're going to be at grazing these livestock in an organic setting. As I said, what we've done is frost seed clover, especially red clover. We do have a stand of native warm season grasses here, which consists of Indian grass, big blue stem, and gamma grass. That stand is here when I started about 10 years ago, and we still manage it. We very seldom hay it, we just use it for grazing. Other things we've done is a combination of using both annual warm season forages such as Sudan grass and Japanese millet, and we also for cool season, we'll use some annuals in the fall for cereal, with cereal rye, wheat being a couple options. And the reason we'll do that is because we like to see, especially with the cereal rye, sometimes you can get you're ready to start grazing a little bit earlier in the spring than what you might be with fescue. It'll take off a little bit sooner as it starts to warm up. But again, we really try to make sure we have as much diversity within our pastures as possible. And I'll back up just a little bit more. It's not only the diversity in what you have there, but the other thing we do is the rotational grazing. We try to rotate, or we do, I shouldn't say we try. We rotate the flock on a very regular basis. Depending on what time of year it is, it could be a daily rotation, but typically no more than a 3-day rotation from one paddock to another. And a lot of that is basically just managing the residue. There's a rule of thumb, if you're not familiar with the rotational grazing, is that you take half of the forage, you leave half behind. And there's actually sometimes early in the spring, it may be more like you only take a third and leave 2/3 behind. The reason is that when you think about the forages, realize that an easy way of envisioning is the fact that the material or the forage material you see above the ground is also going to be roughly equivalent to what you see below the ground in the form of the roots. If you start to graze it too soon and you don't leave enough behind, then it has an impact on the roots as far as determining or greatly reducing the amount of forage that's available throughout the year. Another big consideration is a rest period. And by that I mean, if we graze it today, this particular, let's say it's paddock number 15, how long do I leave paddock 15 empty with no animals on it before I come back? We try to go 45 to 60 days between grazing episodes on any given pasture. And again, that varies from what time of year it is. Early in the spring, there may be times where we're grazing it every 30 days. We just move very, very fast because you have a lot of lush growth. We don't want it to get out of hand. We want to try and keep it vegetative. But as it starts to warm up, the forages start to mature, then we may slow down a little bit and get that closer, as I said, to the 45, 60 days. With the small ruminants, and I think this is a really, really big part of what we've done to help us maintain the organic setting for livestock, is multi-species grazing, specifically having cattle in the system. And we do a wide range of approaches to that. Sometimes we will have the cattle and sheep actually grazing together in the same paddock on any given day. And other times we will have the sheep leading the cattle, where basically one day, the cattle are one day behind the sheep. A couple of reasons for that. Number one is the forages of choice for sheep versus the cattle are going to be different. So they have different grazing patterns, and that will also help foster some of your diversity and maintain the diversity within your pastures. But possibly even more important is that the cattle will help break the life cycle of those internal parasites or the larvae that are within the forages. A lot of the larvae, especially for the Haemorrhagis contortus, which is one of the biggest challenges we have with small ruminants, if you graze too short, those ewes or those sheep are going to pick the larvae back off the forage, and it just keeps recycling through their system, and you tend to get a much greater worm load or parasite load on those animals. However, if those cattle were to graze that same forage, even though they would pick up the larvae, would go through their system, that particular species is not going to affect your cattle. However, the larvae will not be able to survive the passage through the cattle's digestive system, and so therefore basically you're breaking the life cycle of your internal parasites. So we make sure that we always do multi-species grazing, and we have cattle in our system to help us overcome the internal parasites. As I've heard a lot of your really good grazers that have done it for a long time with multi-species say, there's an old saying that basically says, cattle pastures make good sheep pastures also make good cattle pastures. And so again, it just emphasizes the fact that the more you can do with multi-species grazing, the better. Other strategies that we look at is genetic selection. Even here at Lincoln, I can go back or think back probably 5 to 8 years ago, where we came into a situation where we did have a really, really big load of internal parasites. We started to lose animals, and it was really wreaking havoc on the overall health of our flock. And what we ended up doing was basically we just did a really hard selection process where we were treating the animals that were being impacted by the internal parasites. But if we had to treat those animals more than once, then the second time we would treat them after they recovered, we would sell them, remove them from the system. We closed the flock. We only kept our own ewe lambs back. We didn't bring them in from any other sources. And so it was a process that took a couple of years. But basically what we did was we removed the animals from our flock that were most susceptible to the impacts of internal parasites. And since we've done that, when I look at not only at Busby here, where I said we have 120 ewes, this particular flock, we don't have any individuals that have been dewormed in over 2 years, probably actually coming up on 3 years. But also the other research farms we have here at Lincoln, even though the other 2 farms are not certified organic, we basically follow the same strategy, the same management strategies. And again, at that farm, we have over 200 ewes, and none of those animals have been required any kind of deworming protocol for a couple of years as well. So it's just a matter of basically your grazing patterns as well as multi-species grazing. And then if you still have animals that struggle with the internal parasites, then I strongly suggest you take a look at getting genetics, a different set of genetics, moving them out of the flock. One challenge that I hear from a lot of producers is, if I'm a new producer, how do I go about getting those genetics? Making sure I get the right genetics to start out, because that's really important. It's not easy, especially right now. The market for small ruminants, of sheep especially, is really, really good. But what I suggest is do your homework. There are some really good producers around the state of Missouri that have been in the business for a long time that manage basically the same way I'm talking about we do here at the Busby farm or at Lincoln University, and get genetics from a source that does manage the grazing management and that you trust and know that they have the kind of genetics that can go out and basically perform without relying on any kind of dewormers or other treatments. The other tools that I've listed here that you can use, FAMACHA score as well as fecal egg count. FAMACHA, if you're not familiar with that, is basically a process where if you can do this on a periodic basis to the entire flock if you suspect you have issues, or you may just do it to an individual animal that seems to be hanging back, doesn't seem as thrifty as what you would hope for. But it's basically a process where you look at the eyelid of that animal and look at the color. What the FAMACHA is going to indicate is that as the redness of the eyelid bleaches out, that animal is starting to become anemic, which indicates that it's having issues with internal parasites. So again, if you're in the process of trying to make that genetic selection and you want to see which animals seem to be doing best, you may do this on a periodic basis for the whole flock. Here, basically, our approach has been we only do it if we see an animal that's questionable, that seems to be a little bit unthrifty. The other approach might be your fecal egg count. Fecal egg count is just like it sounds, basically where you get a sample of feces from an animal, and there is a process that you have to follow where basically you put it under a microscope and you look at the number of larvae eggs that are within that sample. And what's really interesting when you do that is that there's a wide range where animals may be impacted at, one animal may be impacted at a much lower egg count versus another animal. And actually Lincoln University has done a lot of research with that. And I would suspect that we're going to start doing a little bit more as far as offering workshops to producers and help get you trained to that, so that it may be something you can do in your own operation. Overall, again, another strategy though is just limit stress on the animals. And this is not just stress as far as there's some things you can't control, obviously. If you're in the middle of August, you have heat stress, etc. There's not much you can do to limit that. But otherwise, as far as your grazing management, the forage availability, how much plant diversity do you have out there in your different pastures, even how you handle an animal on a daily basis. When we go out to rotate the flock here at the Busby farm, we walk out, we open the fence and they run through. They know that they're going to fresh forage. It's a matter of just taking a couple of minutes. And if you have that system set up, then obviously the rotation through the pastures, there is no stress on the animals. They have plenty to eat. They know they're going to fresh pastures. They know the process. And so it's not only how you feed them, what forages you have available, your vaccine program, but also just how you handle those animals on a day-to-day basis. But the limitation of stress is critical in any livestock handling operation, but especially if you want to do it on an organic basis, where the types of inputs you have at your that you have access to and you can use are very limited. And then basically, and obviously as I state here, this is just in my opinion, but I pose the question, what is the biggest challenge to converting from conventional to organic production? And again, as I said, just strictly my opinion, is it's your mindset. I have a farming operation of my own. We raised turkeys for about 25 years for a corporation. We raised about 50,000 birds per year in very intense confinement. And now we raise cattle and hogs, and we do all the, not organic. I could be organic for both the cattle and the hogs if I so wished. However, I do it all natural. And quite frankly, I deal with documentation every day here at the Lincoln farm. And I really don't have a desire to go home and try to maintain that type of system. But again, my approach is the same. After 25 years of raising turkeys in confinement, I made the decision that I really didn't, that's not the manner in which I wanted to handle livestock. And so with cattle, my own operation, we still do the rotational grazing. We don't use any antibiotics or any inputs, but realize that it's not just as simple as going out and turning animals out to pasture and not using anything and all of a sudden you're organic. I found that out that when I transited, or when I made the movement from confinement on turkeys, just even to cattle and the grazing system, you have to find ways, you need to be more aware of the system around you. In an organic production system, you have to be attuned to the environment, know what is going on. If it's during summertime and you have heat stress versus during the wintertime where you have limited forages, etc. Just make sure you do what you can to limit the stress on those animals, be more aware of nature and what you can do to work in tune with nature in order to maintain your organic production system. So it's just a different approach. Anyone can do it, but it's realize that when you go into it, if you have a problem with weeds and you're organic, you're not going to be able to go into the shed and grab your can or bottle of Roundup and take care of it. You need to find another method to address the issues you may have. So I guess that's really concludes my PowerPoint presentation and my presentation in general. I definitely would like to open it up for any kind of questions or discussions that anyone may have. Amy, if you have any more?
Yeah, there is, Linda Coffey is asking, who do you use for a source for organic seeds? She says she has lots of people ask about that. So what kind of sources do you have?
Yeah, so as far as seeds, the organic seeds, our main source is Albert Lee Seed. And Albert Lee Seed is based out of Minnesota. There is also Lakeview Seed Company. I think they're up around Middleton, Missouri. They may actually be a dealer for the Albert Lee Seed as well. But Albert Lee Seed is our main outlet for organic seed for pastures, and they will ship directly to us.
Okay. I have no more questions in the chat. So for those of you that are still listening, if you have any questions, you want to go ahead and drop those in the chat. I think Dr. Salinas has a couple of questions.
Yes, Chris, you were talking a little bit about grazing multi-species, and I had an email from a person talking about how to manage the cattle, cows, and small ruminants. So in what proportion, who will be grazing first, the cows or the small ruminants, specifically in relation to prevent the parasites.
Okay, and I apologize, Dr. Salinas. I had my speakers turned down really low, and I did not catch all your questions. I apologize.
Okay, and my mic was up also, and sorry. So I received an email from a person saying that was interested to know a little bit more about grazing cows and small ruminant. So in what proportion, how many cows, how many ewes, wherever.
Okay. Yeah, you know, we've had that question before, and it was really interesting here. About 2 weeks ago, I attended a workshop where there were a half a dozen individuals that I would consider to be some of the top grazers of small ruminants in the state of Missouri, and I'm always excited to listen to their strategies. And that same question came up, you know, regarding stocking rate, et cetera. And one thing that was really interesting, when I listened to them, was they all said the same thing, that they really couldn't tell you what their stocking rate was. And what they mean by that is basically it's forage driven. You know, we maintain 120 ewes here at the Busby farm. The number of cattle fluctuates a little bit more. Typically, like right now, we probably have about 25 head of cows here. And so we'll run those together. The main time we don't want to run them together at the same time in any given paddock is during lambing season, just because we want to make sure the lambs don't get trampled by the cattle, etc. But basically what we do is when we graze them together, we'll just make our paddocks a little bit larger. The way it's set up here at the Busby farm is all our perimeter fencing around the outside of the pastures is permanent fencing. But if I were to go back to the map, you could see there were some pastures that were as large as 20, 25 acres. And so within that 20-acre pasture, we'll use 1 or 2 strand tensile wire, not high tensile, but basically temporary fencing. And when we run the animals together, all in the same paddock, we'll just make that paddock a little bit larger than we would if we had the sheep and the cattle running separately. So basically, the ratio, I don't know that there's necessarily a magic number as much as just knowing what forages you have available and making sure that if you run them together, you may have to move on a little bit more frequent basis. Just make sure in the process of doing that you don't overgraze. But in my opinion, it's a process of letting the forages and the forage availability drive the process.
Okay. Another question is how more expensive is to produce organic pasture and organic meat from small ruminant? Do you have any number, like any guessing or calculated at the farm?
I don't have specific numbers. That's one thing about the university system. Here we don't maintain, currently anyway, we don't maintain costs for the livestock on a daily basis. But again, in our system here, and I think would be true of most of your organic grass-based systems, probably your biggest cost is going to be if you use any of the annual forages and your supplements. So here for mineral, we use a Redmond's Trace Salt Mineral Mix, and we use it for both cattle and sheep. And so that mineral is going to be, just as an example, I believe the last time I picked some of those up, a 50-pound bag for the Redmond Trace Mineral Salt was about $14 for a 50-pound bag. So it's, obviously more expensive than some of your other mineral mixes you may use for your conventional herds. But again, as long as you keep it in front of them, they're only going to eat a very small amount. So it's, at the end of the day, it's not a huge input cost. So really for us, we have the mineral, if we use any seed that we plant our annuals, but other than that, everything's grass-based. We don't creep feed. We don't supplement the ewes other than the hay that we bale here on the farm. So in my opinion, the added cost of producing the organic animals within a grass-based organic system is minimal. Now, one thing I would add to that, and this is kind of interest, we did have a researcher here that was doing out-of-season breeding, which basically involved where we were lambing in the fall instead of typically like you would in the spring. And we were targeting selling those lambs typically in December and January, but the thought process of trying to sell those lambs a little bit closer to some of the holiday seasons when the market might be a little bit higher. And what we did was we sold at a local sale barn, but we always notified the sale barn at least 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. And they would post it on their website that there was going to be a group of certified organic lambs being sold at on this particular sale date from Lincoln University. And then we compared pricing for those organic lambs for the same size lambs, conventional lambs, at that same sale date. And if I remember right, I think what we were seeing was about a 15 to 20% premium for the organic lambs versus those that were conventionally produced.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much. Is there any other question, Amy?
Nope, I don't have any other questions in the chat. So I might take this opportunity real quick, Chris, to thank you for your time. This is great information. And to mention to those people that are listening that our next session's coming up. We'll have 2 in June that are confirmed for sure. One is on soil regeneration on June 17th. And then we're going to talk reproduction and nutrition on June 24th. There may be another session in there, but those are our 2 that are confirmed. So, and we also will have a booth at the Midwest Buck Sale, which is next week. The booth, it looks like it'll be dates the 2nd through the 6th. And I know that Dr. Salinas is conducting a FOMACHA training on June 4th. So if you guys are going to be in the area in Sedalia, you might stop by our booth and come see us. Other than that, Dr. Salinas, I have nothing.
Well, just to say thank you to Chris for your time and your experience. You know a lot of things with running the farm and your personal experience. So we appreciate very much your time and sharing all these. For sure, there have been some people watching and listening, and the record for some others later on. Yeah.
Okay, and it was a pleasure to share our experiences here and what we do. I would also say for producers that are looking at possibly organic production or just small ruminant production in general, just wanting to get in, if you have an interest in coming to the Lincoln Farms and have us show you what we do, we'd be happy to have you here. Just let us know and we can make it, make it available to you to view what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.